Your wife is trespassing. She's leaving now.
Shinoshin! She outranks you by several lifetimes.
She was already on the phone with 911 when I stepped onto the porch, her voice sharp enough to cut through the early morning air. Sabrina Voss stood at the edge of my walkway like she was staking a claim, one manicured hand gripping her phone and the other pointing at my front door, as if she'd caught a criminal inside instead of my wife. The enforcer in crimson didn't even flinch when she saw me. She just lifted her chin, certain she'd win whatever battle she'd started. She's refusing to leave the property, she snapped into the receiver. Yes, right now, she's hostile. Hostile. My wife, the chief of police. If you've ever felt the heat in your chest when someone crosses a line they shouldn't touch, hit the subscribe button right now, I said quietly. You're going to want to stay with me. What happened next? Flip this neighborhood upside down. I stepped off the porch, keeping my voice level. You're making a mistake. She didn't lower her phone. No, you're making one. Unauthorized occupants trigger automatic intervention. Unauthorized. She said it like she was reading scripture. I'm Cole Whitaker, I told her, letting the calm settle into my tone. Former emergency systems analyst. I know exactly how 911 protocols work, and exactly how misuse blows back on the caller. For a heartbeat, she faltered. Just one. But it was enough to show she hadn't expected resistance. The clipboard queen recovered quickly, shielding her expression behind the cold mask she wore. Whenever she flexed authority she didn't really have. This house wasn't just our address. It wasn't just where Sabrina and I slept, or ate, or argued about paint samples. This was her father's home, his last gift before he passed. The hail porch lantern her dad built with his own hands still hung beside our door, glowing every night just like he asked her to keep it. The board chair wasn't just trying to throw my wife out. She was trying to rip her away from the one piece of him she still had. And that was why my blood burned hotter than the morning sun rising behind us. Sabrina opened the door behind me, uniform half-buttoned, hair still damp from the shower. Cole, what's going? The tyrant in heels cut her off. Ma'am, step outside. You are not listed as an authorized resident of this property. Crescent Ridge bylaws require immediate removal. I almost laughed, not because any of it was funny, nothing about this was funny, but because the board chair had no idea who she was talking to. No idea that the woman she was accusing of trespassing commanded every patrol in this county. No idea that the intruder she was reporting to 911 supervised half the officers rushing toward our street. Sabrina blinked once, then twice. Is she serious? Dead serious, I muttered, and dead wrong. The officer of rules strode up behind Sabrina Voss, snapping photos like he was documenting a crime scene. The clipboard queen moved closer, whispering something about liability and forced eviction, as if reciting lines she'd rehearsed. My heart hammered once, hard, before settling into something colder, something steadier. Where are you watching from? I asked the viewer, locking eyes with the woman trying to rewrite my life with a phone call. She didn't know the truth yet, but she would. The moment those responding officers arrived and recognized their own chief, everything Sabrina Voss built on intimidation would collapse. And she had no idea the storm she'd just called onto herself. The sirens weren't loud yet, but I could hear them, faint, rising, threading through the quiet morning, like a warning the neighborhood wasn't prepared for. Sabrina Voss heard them too. The board chair straightened her spine, gripping her phone tighter, her expression hardening as if the approaching units were proof that her fabricated authority actually meant something. The enforcer in crimson looked almost victorious, like she'd summoned a force she believed she controlled. Sabrina stepped onto the porch beside me, disbelief tightening her jaw. She really called them? I nodded once. And she thinks they're coming for you. The clipboard queen took that moment to stride closer, her tablet raised as if it were a badge. Per Crescent Ridge regulations, she declared, unregistered occupants, especially those refusing to comply, will be removed for community safety. Removed. Community safety. They tossed these phrases around like weapons because they expected people to bow to them. But standing here, with the hail porch lantern glowing beside us, it only reminded me why this wasn't just about HOA power. This was about protecting a legacy. Sabrina's father built this home. He carved his initials into the beam above the porch. He raised her here, taught her what justice meant here. And now, the tyrant in heels wanted her dragged out like a stranger. Sabrina folded her arms, calm but simmering. You have no jurisdiction over who lives in my house. It's not your house, the board chair snapped. Our records don't list you. I wonder why, I said quietly, watching her flinch. Because I recognized the pattern. After years in emergency systems analysis, I could spot manipulation on a database like a fingerprint. Entries don't disappear on their own. Someone deletes them. Someone who benefits from the deletion. Someone like Sabrina Voss, who treated the HOA's digital infrastructure like her personal kingdom. The officer of rules moved to the edge of our lawn, snapping photos of the porch, the lantern, even our house numbers. Document everything? He muttered. Board review at noon. Board review. As if she were holding a courtroom. In her pocket. The sirens grew closer. Fast now. The tension in the air thickened. Neighbors began stepping outside, drawn by the noise. Mrs. Langford peeked through her blinds, worry creasing her face. Two brothers down the street stopped their bikes mid-roll, staring. Even the wind felt charged, carrying the weight of something escalating too quickly. Sabrina Voss smirked. Good, they're almost here, and when they arrive, they'll remove her immediately. That's what you think, I murmured, because this was the flaw in her entire plan, the part she didn't know. She thought power came from bylaws, clipboards, and threats. She didn't understand the power of truth, of rank, of actual authority rooted in service, not ego. Sabrina stood taller, brushing off her uniform collar. She really believes officers will drag out their own chief? She whispered. They don't know who they're responding to, I said. Not yet. That was the brilliance and danger of Sabrina Voss's lie. She reported a hostile intruder refusing to leave. She didn't use names. She didn't mention the chief of police. She wanted chaos. She wanted force. She wanted drama powerful enough to justify her tightening grip on this neighborhood. The sirens cut abruptly as patrol cars rolled up the street, stopping just beyond our driveway. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. The responding officers scanned the scene, hands near holsters, prepared for confrontation. The clipboard queen's smile tensed. The officer of rules stepped back to frame everything in his camera, and the board chair pointed straight at my wife. There, she declared. Remove her. The officers moved forward, until they saw Sabrina's badge glint beneath the morning sun. Their steps faltered. Confusion rippled across their faces. Whispers broke out between them. And, just like that, the power shifted. The officers froze mid-stride, their boots planted at the edge of our walkway as their eyes locked on Sabrina's badge. One of them, Officer Riggs, blinked twice, confusion hitting him so fast it washed the authority straight off his face. The second officer lowered his hand from his holster completely. Whatever threat the board chair claimed she'd found here didn't line up with the chief of police standing calmly on her own porch. But Sabrina Voss didn't see their hesitation as a warning. She saw it as defiance. The enforcer in crimson stepped forward, anger tightening her features. What are you waiting for? She snapped. She's the intruder. Remove her. Neither officer moved. Their eyes flicked from Sabrina's badge to me, to the Hale porch lantern glowing against the wood beam like a witness refusing to stay silent. That's when I saw him, Evan Brooks, standing behind the patrol car, uniformed but uneasy. The 911 dispatcher who took Sabrina Voss's call, and our conflicted witness. He wasn't meant to be here. Dispatchers don't typically come into the field unless something feels wrong. And the way he hovered near the car, one hand gripping the doorframe, one foot angled to retreat, everything about him screamed a man torn in two. The clipboard queen noticed him too. Dispatcher Brooks, you logged the call. Confirm the threat, she demanded. His throat bobbed. The caller stated an unknown female was refusing to leave the property. Sabrina stepped forward. Unknown? He looked at her uniform, her badge, her nameplate. His eyes widened with realization. Like puzzle pieces he didn't want to see suddenly fell into place. I didn't know it was you. The officer of rules muttered, just tell them she refused to comply. Evans swallowed hard. I don't think that's accurate. There it was, the first crack. The internal struggle written across his face. His shoulders hunched inward the way people do when they're caught between truth and pressure. His fingers twitched like he wanted to hide them. His eyes kept darting to the board chair, then back to the chief, then to the ground, like like he was searching for moral footing. Sabrina Voss didn't give him a second to breathe. Dispatcher Brooks, this woman refused to identify herself. You told the responding units the situation was escalating. Evan's brows pulled together. No, you said she was hostile. I only repeated what you reported. And now you're contradicting an HOA incident report? The tyrant in heels snapped, her voice slicing through him like a blade. He flinched, a real, visible, instinctive flinch. His loyalty was being tugged in two opposite directions. The board he feared, and the truth staring him in the face. Officer Riggs stepped toward him. Brooks, is she the chief or not? Evan hesitated, breath shallow, then nodded. She is. Silence swept across the street. Neighbors leaned out from porches, holding their breath. Even the wind stilled. The enforcer in crimson's face faltered, barely, but enough for satisfaction to pulse through my chest. Sabrina folded her arms, steady and unwavering. Now that we've cleared that up, she said softly, would someone like to explain why the HOA president called in a false trespass report on the chief of police? The clipboard queen froze. The officer of rules lowered his camera. Evan's guilt thickened across his features, shoulders sinking as his internal conflict settled into something heavier. Responsibility. And Sabrina Voss? She straightened her posture, eyes blazing with panic disguised as fury. The board chair wasn't losing control. She had already lost it. And this was only the beginning. The moment Evan confirmed Sabrina's identity, the street shifted. Not physically, but in mood, in weight, in the way neighbors leaned farther out onto their porches as if sensing the axis of the neighborhood tilting. And Sabrina Voss felt it. The board chair's confidence cracked like thin ice, her polished authority slipping beneath her with every second she failed to regain control. But she wasn't the type to retreat. No, Sabrina Voss was the type who doubled down. She stepped forward, heels stabbing the concrete like punctuation marks. You're all misunderstanding the situation, the enforcer in crimson announced, voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. This isn't about rank, it's about compliance. Crescent Ridge requires all residents to be officially registered. She's not. Therefore, she's trespassing. A low murmur rippled through the watching neighbors. Even they could hear the desperation wrapped in her words. Sabrina lifted an eyebrow. Trespassing? In my own house? The clipboard queen rushed to her side, shoving her tablet forward as if digital ink could override reality. Our records show only one occupant for this address, and HOA data supersedes verbal claims. I laughed under my breath. HOA data supersedes the county? Since when? The officer of rules snapped, It's enough for enforcement. Though his voice lacked the conviction he'd displayed earlier, his camera hung slack at his side now, forgotten. Evan hovered a few feet away, still torn between the institution he served and the truth unraveling before him. His posture sagged, guilt pressing into the curve of his shoulders. The internal struggle painted across his face was becoming impossible to hide, and that was exactly why the tyrant in heels made her next move. We're initiating an emergency board action, she declared, turning toward the small but growing cluster of neighbors. Effective immediately, this property is under compliance review. No one enters or exits without HOA authorization. A gasp rippled through the group. Mrs. Langford raised a trembling hand to her mouth. A father holding his toddler shook his head in disbelief. You can't blockade a private residence, Sabrina said quietly. Too quietly. That tone always meant she was approaching a line someone else didn't want her to cross. The board chair lifted her chin. We can when community safety is at risk. And there it was. The familiar weapon. The fabricated phrase she used to justify everything. Safety from what? I asked, stepping closer. A homeowner? A wife? A chief? You're interfering, Mr. Whitaker, the enforcer in crimson hissed. This doesn't concern you. She's my wife, I shot back. It concerns me more than anyone here. The clipboard queen flicked her eyes across her screen, scrolling rapidly. I'm flagging this residence for emergency override. Once filed, officers will be mandated to remove unregistered occupants pending review. Evan's head snapped up. Wait, override? You never mentioned that on the call. Because it wasn't relevant at the time, the tyrant in heels said smoothly. He swallowed, throat visibly tight. You can't file an override without evidence. not after what happened last month with the Jensen case. The board chair's glare whipped toward him like a blade. "Stay in your lane, dispatcher." But he didn't step back. Not this time. Sabrina looked toward him, reading everything in his eyes. The doubt, the regret, the fear of choosing wrong. "Evan," she said softly, "is there an override request attached to that call?" He shook his head, slowly, reluctantly. No, there wasn't. And that single sentence shattered the last thread Sabrina Voss had been clinging to. She straightened, fury pulsing across her face. "If the HOA records are incomplete, I will correct them myself." She turned abruptly toward the street. Board meeting, noon, mandatory attendance. Neighbors recoiled. The officer of rules scrambled to keep up. The clipboard queen trailed close behind, typing frantically. And the board chair walked away. But not in victory, in retreat, a temporary one that promised escalation. Because Sabrina Voss didn't lose battles. She regrouped, and we all felt the storm she was about to unleash. The street didn't calm after Sabrina Voss stormed off, it tightened. Conversations broke out in hushed waves, neighbors clustering in small groups, like they were afraid the enforcer in crimson might still be listening from behind a hedge. Patrol cars lingered longer than usual, engines rumbling, officers exchanging glances they didn't dare voice out loud. But eventually they drifted away, leaving an uneasy quiet in their wake. Sabrina exhaled slowly, the weight of what almost happened settling across her shoulders. "She's not done," she murmured. "You saw the look on her face." "I saw her losing ground," I countered, "and people saw it too." But I wasn't celebrating, not yet, because the clipboard queen's threat about the emergency override stuck in my mind like a hook. Something wasn't right. Something about the way she'd scrolled her tablet, the way the officer of rules had stood waiting for instructions, the way the board chair spoke like she already had the next move ready. It all pointed to a deeper play. And I'd spent years reading deeper plays. I wasn't just an EMT supervisor. Before that, I worked in emergency response systems. Analysis, back-end integration, call routing integrity. I knew exactly how 911 protocols were supposed to flow, and exactly how they could be manipulated by someone who understood the cracks. Sabrina turned to head inside, but I caught her arm. "Hold up, I want to check something." Her brows rose. "Check what?" "That call." She understood immediately. "Cole, I'm not pulling records," I said. "I don't need to. I just need to look at the timestamps on the outgoing unit dispatch and compare them to the protocol they should have followed." She hesitated, and then nodded. We stepped back. Inside the house, the Hale porch lantern casting a warm glow behind us as the door closed. I headed straight for the living room table where I'd left my old emergency systems laptop, the same one I used for training simulations, the same one that hadn't failed me once. While it powered on, the distant echo of neighbors talking filtered through the walls, fearful, curious, confused. They'd seen power shift in ways they'd never witnessed before. This wasn't a petty violation. This wasn't a mailbox issue or a lawn complaint. This was the HOA calling 911 to force a homeowner out. No one wanted to be next. When the screen finally loaded, I checked the timestamp Sabrina Voss provided on the call, 10:32 a.m. Then I checked the dispatch logs, which were publicly accessible summaries, not confidential files. And the moment the numbers appeared, my stomach tightened. "Cole?" Sabrina said softly. "What is it?" "The call routing," I whispered. "It's wrong. There should have been a delay, 3 to 5 seconds. It always existed in the Crescent Ridge area because of how the signal tower chained the data. But there wasn't. It was instant. Instant rerouting, instant classification, instant escalation. "How is that possible?" Sabrina asked. "There's only one way." I turned the laptop toward her. Someone flagged our address in the HOA system and connected it to a priority threat code. Her eyes widened. "She linked our home to a police escalation category?" "Yeah, and that's not something an HOA has access to, unless they manipulated the internal safety reporting bridge." The breath left her lungs. "You're saying she's exploiting an emergency integration tool?" "I'm saying she already did." My voice tightened. "And she'll do it again if we don't expose it." Footsteps sounded on the porch. A shadow passed over the window, someone approaching. Sabrina's hand moved toward her holster out of instinct, but when the knock came, it wasn't forceful. It was hesitant. I opened the door to find Evan Brooks, shoulders hunched, eyes filled with conflict. I think you both need to know something," he said quietly. Something I should have said earlier. His guilt sat heavy in the air. The conflicted witness had returned, and this time, it wasn't hesitation in his eyes. It was fear of what he'd uncovered and of what Sabrina Voss had already planned next. Evan stood on the porch like a man carrying something too heavy for his own conscience, his breath visible in the late morning light. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked past me into the house, toward Sabrina, as if he needed confirmation she was real, safe, and not the hostile trespasser he'd been told she was. When she stepped beside me, arms folded, his shoulders slumped with a mix of shame and dread. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "But after what I saw, I couldn't just go home." I stepped aside so he could enter. He moved slowly, glancing toward the Hale porch lantern, as if it judged him for what he'd been part of. The conflicted tension in him was visible in every stiff movement, every shaky breath. "What did you see?" I asked. He swallowed hard. Something in our dispatch interface, something I didn't understand at first. Sabrina motioned him toward the dining table. The laptop still glowed with the routing discrepancy I'd found. Evan's eyes flicked to it immediately, recognition sparking across his face. "You saw it too," he murmured. "I saw enough," I replied. "That call escalated way too fast. Your system shouldn't have labeled it as a priority threat. Someone tampered with something." He sat, fingers tangled together. Sabrina Voss. She didn't just report a trespass. She accessed the HOA's internal incident panel before calling. I only noticed it because the timestamps didn't match. There was a manual override between the HOA server and our emergency node. Sabrina stiffened. "She connected HOA data to 911? "Not officially," he said, "but she used an integration tool meant for wildfire alerts. Something we installed last year so HOAs could instantly notify residents of evacuations. It was supposed to be one way, but she reversed it. The clipboard queen hadn't just lied. She'd weaponized a piece of tech meant to save lives. For her to pull that off, I said, the board chair must have accessed an admin account. Evan nodded miserably. She did. And once she tagged your house as a potentially hostile location, any 911 call from her number automatically escalated. Sabrina's breath caught. So the officers were primed to expect danger. Yes, Evan's voice cracked. They were walking into a situation they believed could involve a violent intruder, because of her. A chill washed over me, not fear but anger sharp enough to cut. The enforcer in Crimson hadn't just lied about a trespass. She'd deliberately created a scenario where officers might have drawn weapons on the chief of police in her own home. She's escalating, I said. She's not satisfied with a database manipulation or a fake violation. She's willing to use emergency resources as leverage. Because she wants control, Sabrina whispered. Control of this neighborhood. Control of who belongs. Evan clenched his jaw. There's more. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. It wasn't an official document, just handwritten notes, scribbled phrases, timestamps. I overheard her earlier, he said. The officer of rules and the clipboard queen were with her. They think you're a problem couple, that you're undermining the HOA's authority. She said she's going to force compliance through procedural pressure. He met my eyes. She wants to keep using the emergency system. I exhaled, slowly, grounding myself. This wasn't paranoia. This was strategy, hers, and now ours. She said a noon board meeting, I said. She'll push the override there. She will, Evan agreed softly, and she'll make it look legitimate. Sabrina paced once, jaw tight. So, we expose the integration abuse. I nodded. We show the county that she misused a disaster response tool to create a false emergency. We don't need files from her office. We have timing discrepancies, witness testimony, and procedural violations. Evan's voice trembled. If I testify, she'll come after me. You won't be alone, Sabrina said. He looked between us, fearful but resolved. What do we do? He asked. I closed the laptop, the plan forming like iron. We prepare for noon, I said. Because the tyrant in heels thinks she's walking into a victory. I met Sabrina's eyes. But she's walking into exposure. Noon was getting closer, the sun climbing higher, as if it wanted a front row seat to whatever storm Sabrina Voss planned to unleash at the board meeting. Inside our living room, tension sat thick in the air, heavier than the morning humidity pressing against the windows. Evan hadn't moved from the dining table. He sat hunched forward, elbows braced, eyes flicking between the laptop screen and the front door, like he expected the tyrant in heels to kick it in at any moment. He wasn't wrong to fear her, but fear wasn't why he came back. He came because something inside him finally snapped free from the HOA's grip. Sabrina stood near the porch window, arms folded as she watched neighbors drift across lawns, worried parents, retirees whispering behind hedges, people who'd lived under the board chair's control so long they didn't remember what independence felt like. The enforcer in crimson had turned Crescent Ridge into a neighborhood that flinched at clipboards and citations. And now she was ready to use a board meeting to justify the most dangerous abuse yet. Evan rubbed his palms together, nervous energy trembling through him. "I need to tell you everything," he said suddenly. "Not just what I overheard, all of it." I sat across from him, steadying my breath. "We're listening." He swallowed hard. "This morning, before she came to your house, I saw her in the HOA office. She had the officer of rules and the clipboard queen with her. They were looking at the same integration dashboard I use at dispatch, only she wasn't supposed to have access to that version." Sabrina turned from the window. "Which version?" "The emergency bridge," he said. "The one meant for wildfire alerts, amber alerts, things that need immediate mass communication. She used her board chair credentials to bypass restrictions. I didn't realize what she'd done until after the call came through." Anger prickled beneath my skin, sharp and electric. "What exactly did you hear?" He let out a slow exhale. "She told them she was done waiting for compliance, that your house was a threat to community structure, and she said she had a way to fast-track enforcement. The clipboard queen asked if the police would respond faster, and Sabrina Voss said—" He paused, voice breaking. "She said, they always do when they think it's dangerous." Sabrina's eyes hardened, fury simmering behind her calm exterior. She exploited police assumptions. Evan nodded miserably. "She wanted them to treat you like a threat. She wanted a dramatic removal she could use as justification." My pulse tightened. "And the override she mentioned? That's the worst part." He slid his notes across the table. "She plans to file a behavioral risk classification on your property at the meeting. It'll look like it came from multiple complaints, but the officer of rules already drafted the entries. Fake timestamps, fake signatures." A coldness spread through my chest. Not fear, but clarity. "She's manufacturing evidence." "She is," Evan said, voice trembling. "And if she files it, the system will automatically escalate any future HOA report tied to your address. Even a noise complaint." Sabrina inhaled sharply. "She wants perpetual authority over who enters or leaves our home." "She wants control over you," Evan corrected softly. "She thinks removing the chief will prove the HOA can override anyone." Silence filled the room, heavy, unmistakable. Then Sabrina stepped closer to Evan. "You came here knowing she'd retaliate." He nodded once. "I can't let her do this. I took the job at dispatch to help people, not hurt them." "And you're willing to say all of this at the meeting?" I asked. He hesitated, but not from doubt, from courage being born in real time. His jaw tightened, and he met my eyes with a steadiness I hadn't seen in him before. "Yes," he said. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I saw." Relief pulsed through me, brief but real, because this was the turning point. The conflicted witness had chosen a side, but he wasn't finished. "And there's one more thing," he whispered. "Something she doesn't know I overheard." Sabrina and I both leaned in. Evan swallowed. "She said, if this goes wrong, I'll make sure the board believes it's his fault." "She meant you, Cole." The ground beneath our feet didn't shift. The stakes did. For a long moment, Evan's words just hung there, heavy, sharp, undeniable. The idea that Sabrina Voss planned to blame me if her scheme unraveled wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed by someone who'd been in the room when she said it, that shifted everything. It crystallized her intent. The enforcer in crimson wasn't just targeting my wife. She was building a narrative where I would become the neighborhood threat, the disruption, the hostile force she needed to contain. And noon was getting closer. Too close. Sabrina paced near the kitchen island, jaw tight. "She's setting you up as the fall guy," she muttered. "If her override fails, she'll point at you as the aggressor." "She can try," I said, steadying my breath. "But we're not going into that meeting unarmed." Evan rubbed the side of his neck, guilt etched deep into the lines of his expression. "I can testify, but I know the board chair. She'll spin it. She always spins it." "She won't be able to spin protocol," I said. "Not when we show how she breached an emergency alert tool. The clipboard queen could twist words. The officer of rules could twist documentation. But neither of them could twist cold system logic. Not with witnesses. Not with timestamps. Not with procedural violations mapped out in real time." I opened my laptop again, the familiar interface glowing back at me. The dataset wasn't everything, but it was enough to expose what she'd done. The absence of delays, the mismatched routing signature, the sudden priority escalation flag. All anomalies, all traceable. Sabrina leaned over my shoulder. "We need to show the pattern, not just the incident," she said. "If we walk in with one discrepancy, she'll call it an error. If we walk in with a chain, she can't." That's exactly what I'm building. I tapped through logs, reconstructing the flow. 3 steps: HOA input, emergency bridge override, priority escalation. And every one of them happened in under a second. "That's impossible without admin interference," Evan murmured. "Exactly." Outside, neighbors wandered past windows and sidewalks with restless energy. Word of the board meeting was spreading. People were nervous, not for us, but for themselves. If the tyrant in heels could fabricate an emergency to remove a police chief, what chance did anyone else have? Sabrina watched them from the living room window, her silhouette outlined against the sunlight. "They're scared," she whispered. "They want someone to stop her." "They'll have that today," I said. "But they need more than testimony. They need proof." She turned back to me. "Then let's make it clear." For the next half hour, the 3 of us worked silently, almost rhythmically. I reconstructed the routing logic. Sabrina cross-referenced the county regulations she knew by heart. Evan reviewed his notes, rehearsing the sequence he'd deliver. Every few minutes, I felt him glance toward the door, instinctively bracing for Sabrina Voss to appear. She didn't, but her presence lingered like a storm cloud. By the time my model finished compiling, the evidence formed a clean, undeniable arc. "It's ready," I said quietly. Sabrina stepped closer. "Cole, this is airtight." "It has to be." I closed the laptop gently. "Because she's going to attack once we walk into that meeting. She'll come after you, me, Evan. Anyone who threatens the narrative she's built." Evan inhaled shakily. "I'm afraid, but I'm still going." Sabrina placed a hand on his shoulder. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you still do what's right." He nodded, tiny but certain. The clock on the wall ticked. 11:42 a.m. The board meeting was minutes away. I stood, pushing my chair back. "All right," I said. "Time to prepare for the last thing she expects." "And what's that?" Evan asked. "A room she can't control." I grabbed the laptop. Sabrina clipped her badge to her belt. Evan steadied his breath. The clipboard queen, the officer of rules, and the board chair were waiting. But for the first time, they weren't the ones holding the advantage. We were. By the time we stepped outside, Crescent Ridge felt different, charged, watchful, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Clusters of residents stood along sidewalks and driveways, whispering behind hands, eyes tracking us with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. They all knew something had snapped this morning, and they all knew Sabrina Voss would not walk into that board meeting quietly. The tyrant in heels never did anything quietly. The walk to the clubhouse wasn't long, but every step felt like moving deeper into enemy territory. Evan walked between Sabrina and me, shoulders tense, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. "She's going to see me walk in with you," he muttered. "She'll know I'm testifying." "She's already planning to blame Cole," Sabrina reminded him gently. "You're not changing her plan. You're stopping it." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Right." The Crescent Ridge clubhouse came into view. A pristine building with polished stone pillars, a manicured entry garden, and a large community bulletin board filled with rules more than events. And in front of the doors stood the enforcer in crimson herself, flanked by the clipboard queen and the officer of rules. They looked like a panel of judges waiting for sentencing to begin. When she saw us, her eyes narrowed. "You're late," she snapped. "It's 11:55, I replied. "The meeting's at noon." "Board members arrive early," the clipboard queen said, tapping her tablet as if that validated her existence. "I'm not a board member," I said, and thank God for that. A few neighbors near the entrance stifled gasps. Sabrina Voss straightened, heels clicking against the stone as she marched toward me. "This meeting is to address dangerous non-compliance on your property. If you intend to disrupt it, you can leave." "I intend to attend," I said, "and to correct the record." Her gaze flicked to Evan, just a flicker, but it carried so much venom, he flinched. "Dispatcher Brooks," she said, voice dripping with false politeness. "You're here to provide procedural support, correct?" Evan's breath hitched. "No," he whispered, "I'm here to testify." The clipboard queen's eyes widened. The officer of rules muttered under his breath, and the board chair's smile broke like cracked porcelain. But she recovered fast. Of course she did. "So the chief coerced you," she said, turning to the small crowd forming behind her. "Good to know." Sabrina stepped forward, voice firm. "No one coerced anyone. And if you continue accusing officers or dispatchers of misconduct without evidence, I'll add that to my report." A ripple moved through the growing group of neighbors. The board chair didn't like witnesses, especially ones who weren't under her control. I moved toward the double doors. "Let's go in." "Oh no," the enforcer in crimson said sharply, blocking the entrance. "This meeting is for board members and residents in good standing." "I'm a homeowner," I said, "and so is my wife." Her smile twitched. "Not according to our records?" "According to county property records," Sabrina countered, "I am legally listed as co-owner. If you exclude me, you're violating open meeting statutes." The clipboard queen froze. "Open meeting statutes?" "She doesn't know what those are," the officer of rules muttered. I stepped closer to the board chair until she had no choice but to meet my eyes. "You want to run this like a courtroom? Fine. But you don't get to control who testifies." She leaned in, voice dropping to a hiss. "You think you can build a case against me with one glitch and a scared dispatcher?" "No," I said, lifting the laptop under my arm. "I can build it with a system model, protocol violations, timing logs, misuse of emergency tools, and the testimony of multiple witnesses." Her jaw twitched, panic flickered for just a fraction of a second behind the board chair's icy stare, because now she knew. She wasn't facing a scared couple on a porch. She was walking into a room full of people she no longer controlled, and as the clubhouse doors finally opened, the crowd followed us inside. Sabrina Voss was entering her own meeting, but for the first time, she wasn't the one running it. The moment we stepped inside the Crescent Ridge clubhouse, the atmosphere shifted into something tighter, more suffocating. Dozens of folding chairs had been arranged in rigid rows, facing a long table where Sabrina Voss and her board sat like self-appointed monarchs awaiting subjects. The enforcer in crimson perched at the center, hands folded neatly, chin lifted high, as if this entire room still answered to her. The clipboard queen hovered beside her tablet like it was a sacred tablet of law. The officer of rules sat stiffly, camera ready, hoping intimidation would do what facts couldn't. But today, intimidation was losing its shine. Neighbors filled the seats, the elderly young couples, parents with strollers, people who'd lived under the board, chairs control for far too long. Their eyes shifted between us and the front table with a mixture of dread and anticipation. They were here for a reckoning, whether they admitted it to themselves or not. Sabrina Voss tapped her gavel sharply. "This emergency session of the Crescent Ridge Board is now in order. Our first agenda item, addressing the dangerous non-compliance at the Whitaker residence." A murmur rose. Dangerous. She always chose words designed to land like blows. I stepped to the aisle, ignoring the warning glare from the clipboard queen. "Before you start rewriting history, we'd like to make a presentation." The board chair smirked. "You're not recognized to speak. County statute on open residential meetings says otherwise, Sabrina said from behind me, her voice carrying enough weight to shift several heads in our direction. She moved forward, the badge on her hip catching the overhead lights. A visible reminder of the authority the tyrant in heels tried to challenge. The board chair's jaw tightened. Very well, 5 minutes. No, I said. We'll take the time required to establish the truth. I walked toward the front, Evan at my side. He trembled slightly, but he kept moving, courage holding him upright. The officer of rules lifted his camera, but even that lens looked less confident now. I set my laptop on the presentation table, turning the screen toward the room. Rows of timing logs and routing maps glowed brightly. Proof, not accusations. Let's talk about the 911 call, I said calmly, and how it escalated faster than any emergency call in this district should. The clipboard queen stiffened. The board chair narrowed her eyes. I clicked the first timestamp. This is the call initiation. This, I tapped the next line, is the automated escalation. The delay between them should be at least 3 seconds, but instead, I clicked again. 0.1. Gasps echoed behind us. Even the officer of rules lowered his camera a little. That only happens when someone manipulates the emergency bridge integration, Sabrina added, stepping forward. The system designed for wildfire evacuations. A tool meant to save lives, not enforce HOA rules. The clipboard queen shot to her feet. You're twisting the data! No, Evan said, voice shaky but loud. She's right. All eyes turned to him. I saw her use the panel before she made the call, he continued. The board chair accessed the bridge. She purposefully classified the Whitaker home as a threat residence. Whispers spread like wildfire. Mrs. Langford gasped loudly. The officer of rules muttered something under his breath. Sabrina Voss slammed her palm onto the table. You're lying. No, I said quietly. You're exposed. I clicked to the final slide. The chain of override attempts she'd queued for today's meeting. Manufactured evidence. Time-stamped. Fraud. The room erupted. Shock, outrage, disbelief swirling through every row. The enforcer in crimson rose from her seat, but this time her posture faltered, the certainty leaking out of her stance like air from a punctured tire. You abused an emergency system to target my wife, I said, locking eyes with her. And today, everyone sees it. Sabrina stepped beside me, voice steady as steel. And the county will see it too. The board chair opened her mouth. But no words came, not warnings, not threats, nothing. For the first time, Sabrina Voss looked like someone who finally realized the room was no longer hers. We were only one step away from the final blow. The room didn't just stir, it cracked open. Neighbors stood from their seats whispering fiercely, pointing at the screen, at the logs, at the damning timestamps that showed exactly how far Sabrina Voss had gone. The enforcer in crimson remained standing at the center of the board table, but she no longer looked like a ruler presiding over subjects. She looked cornered, boxed in by the truth she'd spent months hiding behind polished shoes and a sharpened voice. This meeting is not, she started, but the crowd drowned her out. You could have gotten someone killed. She targeted the chief. She abused emergency tools. That's illegal. Her composure wavered, the icy certainty in her posture melting under the weight of dozens of eyes. The clipboard queen frantically scrolled through her tablet, looking for something, anything, that would save them. The officer of rules stopped filming entirely. Even the board members seated on either side of Sabrina Voss were leaning away from her, distancing themselves inch by inch. This was the public confrontation the neighborhood never imagined they'd see. Sabrina stepped forward, not as the chief of police, but as a woman tired of being treated like an outsider in her own home. Everyone here deserves the truth, she said, voice resonant enough to cut through the chaos. This board chair didn't just break protocols, she endangered lives, mine, my husband's, and the responding officers, all to justify authority she never had. She didn't even verify the call, Evan added, stepping up beside her. His voice trembled but held firm. She told dispatch there was an intruder refusing to leave. She never said the chief's name. She never clarified. She escalated it on purpose. Gasps rippled across the room. The clipboard queen snapped, "You're breaching confidentiality, Brooks." "No," he replied. "I'm telling the truth." The board chair snapped her gaze back to the crowd. "You're all being manipulated. You don't understand the full situation. You mean your version of it?" I said. I moved closer to the front, placing the laptop on the center of the table where everyone could see it. Here's what she didn't want you to know. She created fake behavioral risk flags, fake community complaints, fake timestamps. She tried to manufacture a threat out of thin air. "That's enough!" she barked. But the crowd didn't obey her this time. Mrs. Langford rose from the third row, shaking. "You threatened me last month when I asked about a tree trimming approval," she said. "Told me I'd be written up if I questioned you again." A father in the back stood next. "You fined my son for chalk drawings on the sidewalk." Another voice rose. "You told us you had police connections. You used fear to control us." A wave of voices surged through the room. Anger, relief, long-suppressed resentment spilling out in a chorus Sabrina Voss couldn't silence. The board chair pounded the table. "Enough! This meeting is not a free-for-all." "No," Sabrina said, stepping forward. "It's accountability." The officer of rules shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should adjourn?" "Adjourn?" A woman near the aisle snapped. "After all this? No, she answers today." Evan took a breath and delivered the final blow. "I already filed an internal escalation. County oversight is reviewing the emergency bridge breach. They're opening an investigation into misuse of law enforcement resources." Silence dropped like a hammer. The enforcer in Crimson's face drained of color, the truth slamming into her like a physical force. Panic flickered in her eyes. Real panic, not the staged urgency she wielded like a weapon. "You went too far," I told her quietly. "Way too far." Sabrina rested a hand on my shoulder. "And it ends today." Residents began chanting, not loud, but unified. "Remove her, remove her, remove her." The board members exchanged terrified glances. For the first time in her reign over Crescent Ridge, Sabrina Voss was powerless, and everyone in the room knew it. The chanting didn't stay soft for long. It grew layer by layer as more neighbors stood, voices rising with the kind of anger that only comes from years of being pushed, intimidated, and silenced. The tyrant in heels tried to glare them down, but for the first time since she claimed the Crescent Ridge throne, not one person looked away. Power wasn't in her shoes, her clipboard, or her voice anymore. It was in the room, in the people, in the truth finally laid bare. I watched her tremble, not visibly, not dramatically, but in the tiny, involuntary shifting of her jaw, cracks spreading beneath the surface. The enforcer in crimson was collapsing under the weight of her own lies. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, grabbing her gavel. "No," Sabrina said, stepping forward with a calm that quieted the entire crowd. "This meeting hasn't reached its vote." The clipboard queen sputtered. "The board chair decides when a session ends." "Not when she's under investigation," Sabrina replied, voice steady as steel. "And not when the board's actions threaten public safety." Evan nodded quickly, terrified, but resolute. "County oversight's reviewing everything. They already flagged the emergency bridge misuse. There's no adjourning until the county clears it." A ripple moved through the room, satisfaction mingled with disbelief. The officer of rules shifted awkwardly, lowering his camera completely now, as if filming this unraveling would somehow make him complicit. The board chair glared at him. "Do something!" He shook his head. I can't help you." Her eyes flared. Anger, betrayal, panic, all fighting for space. "You're all turning on me?" "No," I said quietly. "We're turning toward the truth." Sabrina stepped closer to the crowd, not to lecture them, not to lead a riot, just to speak plainly. No HOA has the authority to weaponize emergency systems. No board member has the right to manipulate databases to force families out. What she did today wasn't just abuse of power. It was dangerous. It risked the lives of officers who responded. It risked mine. And it risked ours, Mrs. Langford called out. Any of us could have been next. Another neighbor added, "She's ruled us through fear." A young mother lifted her hand. "I didn't let my kids draw chalk on the sidewalk for months because I was afraid she'd fine us again." Whispers turned to confessions. Confessions turned to testimonies. Testimonies turned to a wave of courage. The clipboard queen backed away from the table, tablet pressed to her chest. We didn't know the full extent." "Didn't you?" Evan said softly. "Or didn't you want to?" The officer of rules muttered, "This is bad, really bad." I stepped beside Sabrina, laptop still in my hand. We have everything we need, I told her quietly. The timeline, the logs, the patterns, Evan's testimony, witness statements. And the crowd, she said. They're done being silent. When she turned to face the room, her voice carried the weight of what Crescent Ridge had been waiting to hear for years. Those in favor of removing the board chair, effective immediately, raise your hand. Hands shot up, dozens, then more, then nearly every single person present. The clipboard queen raised hers last, slowly, reluctantly, like a woman choosing survival over loyalty. The officer of rules followed, sweat beating along his temple as he realized resistance was pointless. Only one hand remained down. Sabrina Voss's. "You can't do this," she said, voice cracking. "I built this community." "No," I replied. "You controlled it." The hallway outside filled with footsteps, sheriff's deputies arriving after Evan's escalation reached county headquarters. Their presence settled any remaining doubt. The lead deputy stepped forward. "Ms. Voss, you're being placed under investigation for misuse of emergency systems, falsifying reports, and endangering public safety. You'll need to come with us." Her face went pale. Her authority dissolved. Her reign ended. As they escorted her out, the enforcer in crimson didn't look back. She didn't dare. The crowd exhaled in unison. Relief swept the room like fresh air finally flowing through a house that had been locked up too long. Sabrina squeezed my hand. "It's over." "Yeah," I said softly, glancing at the Hale porch lantern glowing through the clubhouse window. "And it's finally safe again." I turned to the viewer, voice steady. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.